Sabrina 90s show. In a Gadda Sabrina. Sabrina asks for more food, and her aunts give her some, and then Hilda asks for more food and gets given some. Salem's made fun of for being overweight apparently, and Zelda suggests dieting to him. Now I have to assume the reason she won't simply zap his weight smaller is that she doesn't want to because he once tried to take over the world. Zelda says sorry to Hilda. It turns out that inexplicably, the vice principal is going to be busy as the substitute teacher of Sabrina instead of a real teacher, which I don't think would ever happen because he'd have to be really busy as a vice principal already, and he's not a teacher. And he somehow doesn't care when he's told that he's expecting the students to do a test on something they weren't studying. There aren't enough flavors for yogurt. Why don't these people bring their own lunches if they don't like what's to eat there? It turns out Hilda's been whining at Zelda repeatedly about her throwing away pants of hers that she could replace with magic anyways. Of course, it's legitimate of her to be annoyed at Zelda, because you wouldn't like having to waste magic to get more. Sabrina's given an assignment by her quiz master to make a time ball for Sabrina to hold and make her surroundings like the time she thinks of. Why would something that reveals the presence of magic so blatantly to mortals be allowed for witches on Earth to use? It's weird because witches don't want mortals to know about them. I assume the spell brainwashed anyone affected into not questioning it. But it doesn't keep the people outside the spell area from finding out about the entire area being put back in time. Sabrina brings Hilda replacement bell bottoms and is shown appreciation, and finds out that only witches notice when the time ball is being used. Meaning that from mortals' perspectives, they don't think anything's wrong. Why would anybody other than the person who used it notice it? Salem eats the time ball without seeing it because he hopes there are sardines in it. And Sabrina gets sent back to the 60s because he was watching a show set in the 60s. So it doesn't have a very strict definition of hold. Even something non-solid, stomach acid, and it still works. Sabrina gets reassured about this by her aunts, who inexplicably don't just use magic to immediately undo the spell of the time ball, or teleport it to them. Why would something so dangerous be unable to be done at will by a point or another bunch of potion ingredients? Why don't they think they can warp the time ball to them? Sabrina predictably gets taught about how bad the 60s was, because she asks Valerie if it would be easier to just wear pants, because then she won't have to deal with her skirt getting measured. Even though this is easy for her because she just stood there. Her aunts are so relaxed by the hippie life they're being useless. And it turns out Mr. Kraft is acting like a quiz-hating, relaxed person who plays a guitar song and gets the students to sing. Years ago, I would have thought this was completely forced, because in an earlier episode, it implied he was conservative, and in this episode, he demonized Bill Clinton for maternity leave. But all of a sudden, being in the 60s made him a liberal, even though he would have been raised in the same place. Now I know the reason Mr. Kraft was a conservative was because he's a contrarian by nature. And the students all around Sabrina are being liberals because that was fully considered the edgy counterculture at the time. So he goes with whatever is the most edgy at the time to be rebellious. And the show's explaining that by the 90s, teenagers weren't quite as interested in being progressive, like chanting against war, or being mean to Libby because she symbolizes the normal expectation of what teenage girls should be, because the adults around them in the 90s weren't as easy to offend as they were in the 60s. All they had to do was wear shorter skirts or insult war. Students like offending adults, so if they're easier to offend, the kids are going to take advantage of that. I think the real reason is the writer thought it would be funny to make Kraft a hippie. Sabrina likes being told that the sit-in of the students got them what they wanted. There's no explanation for why it was as easy as that instead of them all just being given punishments. I assumed that the reason they didn't get enough flavors was because the school had a really low budget. If they're trying to tell me that schools had a higher budget back then, it doesn't teach the lesson as good as it could because nobody says that. Sabrina finds out that Valerie isn't the editor of the school paper anymore because she's a girl. And she tries to apply for college, but trying to hand in the questionnaire she filled out just has her get rejected because it's a men's college. Harvey says his plan with Sabrina isn't to go to college, it's to drive around the world in a bus. And she doesn't like being called my lady either. Zelda says, isn't it fun to eat cheese without knowing it's bad for us, even though they do know that, and could zap away any weight. I figure they're just using it as an excuse to eat cheese because they like it. Zelda is kind of out of character in this episode, being so go with the flow and fun, just because it's the 60s, which is pretty confusing. Sabrina smells sardines on Salem's breath, which caused her to figure out he ate her time ball. So there really were sardines in the time ball. I'm not sure why they were even in there, when they could have easily not been in there. Like, since when are teenage girls really interested in eating sardines? Why does he think the all-powerful witches wouldn't be able to get it out of him? Why is nobody revealing that the only reason they're trying to get him to eat medicine to get the time ball out of him is because they hate him for trying to take over the world? Salem runs away, but later it cuts ahead to the main characters being back to normal, complaining about the sexism we were already told existed back then. Because no duh, Salem couldn't stand living outside, so he came back home. It's anticlimactic that Sabrina didn't get to do anything to earn it as the main character, but this show doesn't really like her having agency. And I assume the reason they didn't just warp him home right away was that, as it's pointed out, they knew he'd go home. And if they waited, one of them wouldn't have to waste magic. This story by Sheldon Bull had Sabrina get stuck in the 60s for such a predictable lesson it wasn't worth being taught at all, because Salem swallowed a time ball for sardines that the quizmaster told someone who lives on Earth to make. This was bewildering to me because you would expect the use of the time ball to reveal magic to mortals, because the mortals just outside of the time ball area would freak out about magic's existence, because them just asking the people near them if they see that too would reveal they aren't hallucinating the 60s cars and clothes, and the normal cars and clothes that go from one area to another, changing the way they look. There would need to be an AI built into the time bowl that covers this up by erasing the memories of any mortals who walk or drive around, wondering why in one neighborhood everyone is wearing clothes and acting like it's the 60s, and in another nobody knows what's going on there. And also any physical evidence of the time bowl impact on the world during that time would also have to be undone by the time bowl. This could all be done, why not? It's magic. And magic obviously has to have a mind of its own with how it works. And the AI of the time bowl would have to make it so that only one time bowl can be used at a time, because Sabrina's family isn't the only family of witches on Earth, I assume. So what happens if multiple witches use the time bowl at once? This wouldn't be the first time that Sabrina experienced a time bowl being used, because there'd be so many witches on the planet. Unless there's barely any families there. I assume the time bowl is an extremely rare thing that barely gets used at all. The fact that's not explained why the mortals just outside the range of the time bowl don't proceed to spread the word about this and it doesn't make it on the news is distractingly bewildering for someone smart enough to wonder about that, because the witches don't want mortals to know about them. Which I only did because Sabrina was told only her surroundings would change, not the whole world, which would cover this up. And wasn't told the evidence of this happening would all be erased, including photos and written records in the media. I was gonna say that actual witches had to be employed full-time to spy on parts of the world just in case they needed to erase the memories of mortals who saw stuff like this happen. And that would be a job where the vast majority of the time they wouldn't need to do anything and it'd be a big money sink for nothing. But there's no reason the witches wouldn't just handle it with magical invisible robots to save money. They could have all the spy witches just be robots. Oh yeah, and it's also forced as hell that the ants don't just warp the time bowl to them right away after it disappeared, preventing the entire episode. Because it isn't simply explained that the time bowl's immune to magic, and they can't zap up usable potion ingredients to make a new time bowl because you can't zap up more magic. So it doesn't explain that the ants had to take a long time shopping for them because there are so many different names of potion ingredients to go through. Why were they so useless in this episode? At least I can easily explain it as the potion ingredients used to make time balls are rare, and the quizmaster already knew that Sabrina had the ingredients and she was really lucky she had them. I guess in any time where no one could find the time ball, eventually the Witches' Council gets involved and makes sure that the time ball gets found. Witches could also zap up robots to look for it.